Nobody had warned Professor Rulin about the smell. He had read the Union dossier on humans. He had studied the biological reports, the planetary surveys, the cultural assessments that described Earth as a category 12 death world where everything from the weather to the wildlife seemed designed to kill. He had prepared himself for the sight of a human, for their dense musculature and their unsettling forward-facing eyes. He had even braced for the sound of them, their voices carrying across rooms like warning calls from apex predators. But nobody had mentioned the coffee. The human walked into the Advanced Reactive Compounds lecture hall 7 minutes late, carrying a metal container that released a dark, bitter vapor into the air. 3 Funaki students in the front row immediately covered their noses. A Mirati lab assistant turned pale blue, which for their species meant something between disgust and genuine fear. Rulin watched from behind his teaching console as the human found a seat in the middle row, dropped a battered bag onto the floor, and took a long sip from the container as though he had not just walked into the most prestigious chemistry program in the Galactic Quadrant. "You must be the human," Rulin said. "Danny Weber," the human said, raising the container in a casual greeting. "Sorry I'm late. The transit pod dropped me on the wrong level." Rulin's 4 arms folded tightly against his chest. He had taught at the Galactic Union Academy on Station Helios, 9 for 42 standard years. In that time, he had never once had a student arrive late to his first lecture, carrying an unidentified liquid and smiling as though nothing in the universe could possibly go wrong. "Please take your seat, Mr. Weber, and please seal that container. Several of your classmates appear to be experiencing respiratory distress." Danny looked around. A small Funaki student beside him, barely half his size with enormous triangular ears, was staring at the coffee mug with her nose twitching rapidly. "Oh, sorry," Danny said. He snapped the lid shut. "It's just coffee. Totally harmless." The Funaki student leaned toward him. "What is coffee?" "Bean juice," Danny said. "You roast the beans, grind them up, run hot water through them. Keeps you awake." "That sounds like an extraction process," the Funaki whispered. "Yeah, basically kitchen chemistry." Rulin cleared his throat, and the room went quiet. He launched into his introductory lecture, the same one he gave every year. He spoke about the sacred responsibility of working with reactive compounds. He outlined the 47 core safety protocols that governed every practical exercise. He described the containment procedures, the emergency suppression systems, the robotic manipulators that students would use to handle any substance rated above a level 3 reactivity index. Every student listened with appropriate gravity. Every student except Danny Weber, who was leaning back in his chair, looking around the lab with the relaxed curiosity of someone browsing a market stall. Halfway through the lecture, Danny raised his hand. "Yes, Mr. Weber. So when do we actually get to mix stuff and see what happens?" Silence fell over the room like a blast shield dropping into place. 36 students from 11 different species turned to look at the human. Rulin's translucent skin flushed from its usual pale silver to a deep amber, the Mirati equivalent of alarm. "Mr. Weber," Rulin said carefully, "this is not a place where we mix stuff and see what happens. This is a controlled scientific environment where we follow tested, approved procedures to achieve predictable, documented results." Danny nodded slowly. "Right. But back on Earth, that's kind of how chemistry started. You mix things, something blows up, you write down what you did, and then you either do it again or you don't, depending on whether you still have eyebrows." A nervous laugh rippled through the back rows. The Funaki student beside Danny, whose name was Scylla, stared at him with her enormous eyes as though he had just described a religious experience. Rulin decided to move on. The rest of the lecture passed without incident, though Rulin noticed several things that troubled him. When he demonstrated the reagent samples on the workbenches, Danny leaned close and inhaled near one of the vials, a primitive technique called wafting that Rulin had only ever seen in historical archives. When the other students donned triple-layered containment suits for the introductory handling exercise, Danny picked up a vial of mild solvent with his bare fingers and held it up to the light. "Mr. Weber, please use the robotic manipulator. It's just a basic solvent," Danny said. "We use stronger stuff than this to clean ovens back home." Scylla, standing next to him in a containment suit that was 3 sizes too large for her small frame, whispered, "You clean your food preparation area with chemical solvents?" "Yeah, you kind of have to. Otherwise, things grow in there." Scylla's ears flattened. "What kind of things?" "Bacteria, mold, the occasional mystery substance in the back of the fridge. Standard Earth stuff." After the class ended and the students filed out, Rulin stood alone in his lab. He opened his personal teaching journal, a document he had maintained for over 4 decades, and began a new entry that he wrote about the human, about the coffee and the bare hands and the casual disregard for protocols that every other species in the galaxy treated as absolute law. He wrote about the look in Danny Weber's eyes when he asked about mixing things, a look that was not reckless or stupid, but genuinely, deeply curious. Then he added a single line at the bottom of the entry. "I will need to watch this one very carefully." He closed the journal and looked at the vial Danny had handled. There was a faint warmth where human fingers had touched the glass. Rulin stared at it for a long time, then quietly placed it in the decontamination unit, just in case. 2 weeks into the semester, Scylla started keeping a list. She called it things Danny does that would get anyone else expelled, and by the 14th day of classes, it was already 3 pages long. She wrote it on her personal data pad in tiny Funaki script, adding new entries after every lab session while her ears twitched with a mixture of horror and delight. Entry 1 was the coffee. Entry 2 was the barehanded solvent incident. Entry 3 was the time Danny tasted a compound to check if the synthesis had worked correctly. He had actually put a chemical in his mouth. Professor Rulin's skin had turned a shade of violet that Scylla had never seen on a Mirati before. He had stood frozen behind his console for a full 6 seconds before managing to speak. "Mr. Weber, did you just ingest an unidentified reaction product?" Danny had looked up, a tiny drop of liquid still on his lower lip. "It's not unidentified. I just synthesized it, and it tastes about right. Slightly too acidic, but that's an easy fix." "Tastes about right," Rulin had repeated, his voice flat and distant, like a machine running out of power. "Yeah, back home. That's how my Nan used to check her jam. Quick taste test. If it doesn't burn, you're on the right track." Scylla had written that one down in capital letters. Now, 2 weeks in, they were doing crystalline synthesis. It was one of the most important practicals of the semester, a 47-step process that required precise measurements, controlled temperatures, and robotic handling at every stage. The goal was to produce a crystal with at least 90% purity. Most students would spend the entire 3-hour session following the protocol step by step, checking and rechecking each variable. Danny finished in 40 minutes. Scylla watched him from her station, her containment gloves hovering over her own half-completed synthesis. Danny had not followed the protocol. He had barely glanced at it. Instead, he had measured his reagents by eye, adjusted temperatures based on the color of the solution, and stirred the mixture with a glass rod using a technique that looked more like cooking than chemistry. "What are you doing?" Scylla whispered. "Eyeballing it," Danny said. "That is not a scientific method. It's the oldest scientific method there is. Humans have been eyeballing chemistry since we figured out that heating rocks gives you metal." Professor Rulin appeared behind them, his 4 arms crossed in what Scylla now recognized as a stress posture. He looked at Danny's workstation, then at the crystal forming in Danny's reaction vessel. "Mr. Weber, you have deviated from the approved synthesis protocol." "Yeah, but look at the crystal." Rulin looked. The crystal was forming beautifully, clear and sharp-edged, catching the lab light in geometric patterns. "The protocol exists for a reason," Rulin said. "Sure, but on Earth, we learn chemistry a different way. We call it kitchen chemistry. You start with baking soda and vinegar when you're about 5 years old. Your mom puts them in a bottle, and you watch the foam shoot out. Nobody gives you a protocol. You just learn what happens when you mix things." Scylla's ears perked up. "You give chemical reactions to children?" "Oh yeah, it's a whole thing. Science fairs, home experiment kits, making slime, building volcanoes. By the time you get to a proper lab, you've already blown up a few things in the backyard." Rulin's skin shifted through 3 colors in quick succession. "You allow children to cause explosions. Small ones. It's educational." The purity results came back at the end of the session. The class average was 88.3%. Danny's crystal scored 98.7%, the highest in the room. Rulin stared at the number on his screen for a long time. Then he entered the grade, added a formal note about protocol deviation, and closed his console with all four hands pressing down harder than necessary. That evening, Scylla found Danny in the student commons. He was sitting cross-legged on a bench, eating something from a sealed container that smelled strongly of spice and heat. Two Arivian students at a nearby table had shifted their crystalline bodies as far away as possible. "Danny," Scylla said, climbing onto the bench beside him. Her feet dangled above the floor. "Tell me more about kitchen chemistry." Danny grinned. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How do humans learn to handle reactive compounds without containment protocols? How do you know when something is dangerous? Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you find out the hard way. My uncle once put a whole packet of bicarb into a pressure cooker. Lid hit the ceiling. He was fine, but the kitchen wasn't." Scylla's eyes went wide. "And this is considered normal?" "Pretty much. Every human has a story about a kitchen disaster. Grease fires, overheated sugar, the time someone microwaved a metal fork. You learn by doing. And sometimes what you learn is how fast you can run." Scylla was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out her datapad and opened a new file. "I want to document this," she said. "Human chemical phenomena. Nobody in the Union has studied this properly. You want to study humans blowing things up. I want to understand why your species treats volatile compounds like toys and still manages to be one of the most scientifically advanced civilizations in the galaxy." Danny leaned back and smiled. "I'll do you one better. I've got an idea. There's a storage room near the commons that nobody uses. If I got some supplies from the next human trade ship, I could show you some real kitchen chemistry. Hands-on. No practicals. Just reactions." Scylla's ears went flat. Then they slowly rose again. "When do we start?" she said. The storage room smelled like sugar and danger. Scylla stood in the doorway, her nose twitching in every direction, trying to catalog the dozen unfamiliar scents that filled the small space. Danny had spent 3 days transforming the abandoned room into something he called a proper kitchen lab. There was a metal table in the center, shelves lined with bottles and packets from a human trade ship, and a handwritten sign taped to the wall that read Danny's lab, safety third. Scylla had asked what happened to safety first and second. Danny had laughed and said those spots were taken by fun and curiosity. She should have left right then. Instead, she pulled up a stool and sat down. "Right?" Danny said, rubbing his hands together. "Lesson 1. The volcano." He placed a small plastic container on the table, spooned in a white powder from a box labeled baking soda, added a few drops of red food coloring, and then poured in vinegar. The reaction was instant. Red foam surged upward, spilling over the edges of the container and spreading across the table in a hissing, bubbling wave. Scylla leaped backward, her ears flat against her skull, her small body pressed against the far wall. Danny stood calmly beside the eruption, grinning. "Acid-base reaction," he said. "The vinegar is acetic acid. The baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. When they combine, you get carbon dioxide gas. That's the foam. Completely harmless." Scylla's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her ear tips. She stared at the red foam dripping onto the floor, then looked at Danny, then back at the foam. "Human children do this?" she whispered. 5-year-olds. Sometimes younger. Your species is insane." "Yeah, probably." She crept closer, reached out one small paw, and touched the foam. It was warm and fizzy. She sniffed it. Vinegar and something sweet. Not dangerous at all. "Again," she said. Over the next week, word spread. Danny's kitchen lab became the worst-kept secret on Station Helios 9. Students from other departments began appearing at the storage room door, drawn by rumors of the human who performed chemical reactions without containment fields or safety permits. Danny welcomed all of them. He showed a group of engineering students how elephant toothpaste worked, mixing hydrogen peroxide with potassium iodide and dish soap until a massive column of foam erupted from a bottle and hit the ceiling. He demonstrated what happened when you dropped candy into carbonated water, sending a geyser of fizzy liquid across the room that soaked two Arivian students who had been standing too close. The Arivians did not mind. They said the carbonation made their crystals tingle in a way that felt pleasant. Scylla became Danny's permanent assistant. She stood beside him during every demonstration, wearing a small apron that Danny had given her and holding a datapad where she recorded everything. She was building her journal, Human Chemical Phenomena, one reaction at a time. She documented the ingredients, the process, the results, and the reactions of the alien audience, which ranged from fascinated to terrified to delighted, sometimes all three at once. It was during the third week that Professor Rulin found out. He had been walking through the Commons level on his way to a faculty meeting when he heard a sound that did not belong on a space station. A deep, resonant whoosh followed by cheering. His skin immediately shifted to a sharp orange, the Mirati color for high alert. He followed the sound down a corridor, around a corner, and stopped in front of the open storage room door. Inside, Danny was holding a metal tray over a small flame. On the tray was a pile of fine white powder. As Rulin watched, Danny tilted the tray, and the powder slid into the flame. A fireball bloomed upward, bright and golden, filling the small room with light and heat. The audience of 12 alien students gasped and applauded. Sugar, dust, combustion, Danny announced cheerfully. Fine particles of sugar, suspended in air, create a flammable cloud. This is why grain elevators on Earth sometimes explode. Rulin's forearms dropped to his sides. His skin went from orange to pure white, which in Mirati body language meant something close to existential dread in O fume hood. No containment field, no emergency suppression system, no fide prov videos, just a human, a metal tray, an open flame, and a room full of students who had apparently forgotten that fire and enclosed spaces were a dangerous combination. Mr. Weber, Danny, turned around. "Oh, hey, Professor. What is this?" "Kitchen chemistry. Educational outreach. Want to see the next one?" "I'm going to do elephant toothpaste again, but bigger." Rulin did not want to see elephant toothpaste, bigger or otherwise. He turned around, walked to the nearest communication panel, and filed a formal report with Dean Passara's office. The response came 2 hours later. Dean Passara, a large Arivian whose crystalline body hummed at different frequencies depending on her mood, reviewed the report and summoned Rulin to her chamber. "No one has been harmed," she said, her harmonics steady and calm. "That is not the point. There are no safety measures in place. The human is conducting unsanctioned chemical demonstrations in a storage room, and students are attending voluntarily. Engagement in the sciences has increased across 3 departments since the human arrived. I would like you to monitor the situation, Professor, not shut it down." Rulin left the dean's chamber with his skin cycling through colors that had no name. He walked back to his office, sat behind his desk, and stared at the wall. Somewhere on the other side of the station, he could hear cheering again. 7 days before the Academy Science Exhibition, Rulin stopped sleeping. This was not unusual for Mirati during periods of extreme stress. Their bodies simply refused to shut down, keeping them alert and watchful, an evolutionary holdover from a time when danger required constant attention. What was unusual was the cause. In 42 years of teaching, Rulin had never lost sleep over a student, but then he had never had a student like Danny Weber. The exhibition was the Academy's most important annual event. Students from every department presented their research, their inventions, and their discoveries to an audience of faculty, visiting scholars, and dignitaries from across the Galactic Union. It was a formal, carefully controlled affair, overseen by safety committees and review boards that ensured every demonstration met union standards. Danny had submitted his proposal 3 weeks ago. Rulin had read it 4 times, each time hoping he had misunderstood something. He had not. The human wanted to set things on fire. On purpose. In front of hundreds of people. Danny's plan had 3 parts. First, a controlled thermite reaction, combining iron oxide and aluminium powder to produce temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. Second, a large-scale sugar dust fireball, the same reaction he had demonstrated in the storage room, but 10 times bigger. Third, what Danny called the grand finale, a rapid decomposition reaction involving hydrogen peroxide and manganese dioxide, combined with metallic salts that would produce a deafening bang, a blinding flash, and a cascade of colored sparks. He had written at the bottom of his proposal, in handwriting that Rulin found almost offensively casual, "Should be a good time." Rulin had filed a Category 5 hazardous event classification with the dean's office. Dean Passera had reviewed it, consulted with the safety board, and then done something that made Rulin's skin turn gray. She had approved the demonstration. "I will attend personally," Passera had said, her crystalline harmonics carrying a note of what Rulin could only describe as curiosity. "I would like to see what the human does." So now Rulin sat in his office at 3 in the morning, station time, reading Earth chemistry textbooks on his console. If he could not stop the demonstration, he would at least understand it. What he found did not help him sleep. Human children, he read, were given chemistry sets as gifts. Small boxes containing actual reactive compounds, along with instructions for experiments that involved heating, mixing, and occasionally producing small explosions. These kits were marketed as toys. They were sold in shops next to stuffed animals and board games. He read about science fairs, where human children as young as 10 presented self-designed experiments to panels of judges. Some of these experiments involved electricity, fire, corrosive acids, and biological specimens. The winning entries were celebrated. The ones that went wrong were retold as funny stories that he read about baking, which turned out to be a chemical engineering process that humans perform daily in their homes. They combined flour, sugar, eggs, and leavening agents, then subjected the mixture to precise exothermic reactions in a metal box called an oven. No safety certification required. No contaminant protocols. Just raw ingredients and heat. One human cookbook described the process of caramelizing sugar as controlled decomposition. Rulin had to close the textbook and sit in silence for several minutes after reading that. The next morning, he found Scylla in the commons. She was sitting with Danny, helping him sort through boxes of materials for the exhibition. "Scylla," Rulin said, "may I speak with you?" She followed him into the corridor, her large ears tilted forward attentively. "You have been working closely with a human," Rulin said. "Yes, Professor. Do you understand what he is planning for the exhibition?" Scylla nodded. "I've helped him design the reaction sequences. The chemistry is sound. I've checked every calculation myself." Rulin studied her. 2 months ago, Scylla had been a nervous first-year student who flinched at loud noises. Now she was standing in front of him, calmly discussing large-scale exothermic reactions. "Are you not afraid?" he asked. Scylla thought about this. "I was at first. Humans handle danger differently than we do. They don't try to eliminate risk. They learn to manage it. Danny says that fear is useful, but only if it teaches you something. If it just makes you stop, it's a waste." Rulin said nothing. He turned and walked away, his skin shifting through slow, thoughtful blues. That night, the night before the exhibition, he went to the storage room. He told himself it was a final inspection, a responsible professor doing his duty. Danny was alone, running through his checklist. The metal table was clean and organized. Every compound was labeled. Every reaction vessel was in its place. For all his chaos, Rulin noticed the human prepared for his demonstrations with the focused precision of someone who understood exactly what he was working with. Danny looked up. "Hey, Professor, come and check on me. I came to ensure that my lecture hall will still be standing tomorrow." Danny smiled. "It'll be fine. I've done these reactions dozens of times. My uncle taught me thermite when I was 14. The sugar dust thing I figured out on my own. And the finale is just a bigger version of a party cracker." A party cracker. Yeah, little paper tubes that go bang when you pull them apart. We give those to children too. Rulin closed his eyes. When he opened them, Danny was watching him with an expression that was surprisingly gentle. "Professor, I want you to know that your class is the best one I've ever taken. You care about this stuff more than anyone I've met. I just think there's more than one way to love chemistry." Rulin stood there for a moment, his skin cycling through colors he could not control. Then he nodded once and left the room. Tomorrow was going to be very loud. The exhibition hall had never been this full. Rulin stood at the back, pressed against the wall between two structural columns, watching the crowd pack in through every entrance. There were students from all 6 academic departments, faculty from disciplines that had nothing to do with chemistry, maintenance workers on their break, a delegation of visiting Funaki scholars who had heard about the human and rearranged their entire schedule to attend. The main hall of Station Helios 9 was designed to hold 400 beings. By Rulin's count, there were at least 600 in there now, with more trying to squeeze through the doors. Someone had set up a live broadcast feed, and the viewership counter in the corner of the display screen was climbing fast. Danny's demonstration was the last event of the evening. The previous presentations had been excellent. A Mirati student had demonstrated a new polymer compound. An Arivian team had shown advances in crystal-based energy storage. A pair of Funaki researchers had presented their work on atmospheric filtration. All of them had used containment fields, robotic handlers, and approved safety protocols. All of them had received polite, respectful applause. Now Danny walked onto the demonstration stage, and the hall went quiet. He was wearing a plain gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a pair of safety goggles pushed up onto his forehead, and an expression that Rulin had come to recognize over the past 2 months. It was the look of a human about to do something that every other species in the galaxy would consider deeply unwise. Scylla stood to the side of the stage, wearing her small apron and holding her data pad. Her ears were trembling, but she was smiling. "Evening, everyone," Danny said, his voice carrying easily across the hall. "I'm Danny Weber, and I'm going to show you what chemistry looks like on Earth." He pulled his goggles down over his eyes. First up, thermite. He placed a ceramic crucible on a fireproof platform, filled it with a mixture of iron oxide and aluminium powder, and inserted a magnesium strip as a fuse. Then he struck a spark. The magnesium caught fire. A second later, the thermite ignited. The white-hot light erupted from the crucible. The temperature gauge beside the stage shot past 2,000 degrees. Molten iron began to drip from the bottom of the crucible onto the fireproof catch plate, glowing like a tiny sun. 3 students in the front row activated personal shield generators. A Mirati professor 2 seats from Rulin turned completely transparent with shock. Someone near the exit screamed. Danny stood 3 feet from the reaction, narrating calmly. Thermite is a mix of metal oxide and aluminium powder. When ignited, the aluminium steals the oxygen from the metal oxide. The result is pure molten metal and aluminium oxide. Humans discovered this reaction in 1893. We use it to weld railroad tracks. The thermite burned itself out. Danny swept the stage clean and moved to the second demonstration. Next, sugar dust fireball. He mounted a fine mesh screen above a large candle flame and filled a bellows with powdered sugar. Scylla helped him position a safety screen between the demonstration and the front row. Danny pumped the bellows. A cloud of fine white sugar dust shot into the air above the flame. The fireball was enormous. A rolling sphere of orange and gold fire bloomed upward, spreading across the stage in a wave of heat and light that reached the first 10 rows. Scylla ducked behind her safety screen. The visiting Funaki scholars grabbed each other. 2 Mirati faculty members in the third row stood up and walked rapidly toward the exit, their skin flashing every color Rulin had ever seen. Danny let the fire dissipate, then turned back to the audience with his goggles slightly singed. Fine particles suspended in air create a massive surface area for combustion. This is why grain storage facilities on Earth have explosion ratings. Flour, sugar, sawdust, any fine organic powder can do this. Human bakers work with these materials every single day. The hall was buzzing, some with fear, some with excitement, most with a combination of both that had no name in any galactic language. Danny looked at Scylla. She nodded, ears flat, but eyes bright. And now, Danny said the grand finale. He set up the final apparatus. A large reaction vessel surrounded by smaller containers of metallic salt solutions, each one designed to produce a different color when heated. The main reaction, hydrogen peroxide and manganese dioxide, would produce a rapid decomposition that generated enormous volumes of oxygen and heat. The metallic salts would ignite in the oxygen-rich environment, creating colored sparks. Danny looked out at the audience. 600 beings from dozens of worlds, all holding their breath. On Earth, he said, we call these fireworks. We set them off to celebrate things. New Year's, birthdays, victories. We fill the sky with fire because we think it's beautiful. He triggered the reaction. The boom hit like a physical force. A shockwave of sound rolled through the hall, rattling the structural panels and vibrating through every body in the room. A blinding flash of white and gold light filled the space, so bright that Rulin's vision whited out for a full second. Then the sparks came. Red, green, blue, silver, and gold, cascading outward from the stage in glittering arcs, drifting through the air like luminous snow, landing softly on the upturned faces of 600 astonished aliens. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Scylla started clapping. Her small paws slapped together with a sharp, rapid sound. A Phenaki student behind her joined in. Then an Arivian. Then a row of Mirati. Within 10 seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, cheering and stamping and making sounds of joy in 30 different languages. Rulin stood at the back of the room. His skin was cycling through every color his species could produce, some he did not know existed. His hearts were hammering. His 4 hands were shaking. Dean Passera stood beside him, her crystalline body still humming from the shockwave. She turned to him, her harmonics low and full of something like reverence. Now I understand, she said quietly, why they survived that world. On the stage, Danny took a small bow. Behind him, a tiny flame caught the edge of his demonstration table. Without looking, he reached back and patted it out with his bare hand. In the front row, 5 students fainted. Rulin's letter of resignation was exactly 1 page long. He had written it the morning after the exhibition, sitting at his desk while the station buzzed with noise outside his office door. Students were still talking about the humans' demonstration. Faculty members were still arguing about whether it had been brilliant or criminal. The maintenance crew was still cleaning colored sparkled dust out of the exhibition hall's ventilation system. Rulin had written the letter in careful, formal Mirati. He cited 42 years of service. He mentioned his perfect safety record. He noted that the events of the previous evening represented a fundamental departure from the principles he had spent his entire career upholding, that he signed it, sealed it, and sent it to Dean Passera. The response came within an hour. Not a written reply, but a summons to her chamber. Passera's office was a circular room near the top of the station, its walls made of transparent crystal that looked out into the binary star system. She stood in the center, her massive crystalline body refracting the starlight into moving patterns on the floor. I am not accepting your resignation, she said. Dean Passera, with respect, the decision is mine. Sit down, Rulin. He sat. He did not have much choice. When an Arivian dean spoke in harmonic bass, it was less a suggestion and more a geological event. The recording of Danny Weber's demonstration, Passera said, has been viewed 14 million times on the Union Network in the last 12 hours. It is the most watched educational content in the Academy's 300-year history. Rulin said nothing. Applications to the chemistry program have increased by 40% since yesterday. We have received inquiries from 6 other academies asking how they can develop similar programming. The Phenaki Science Council has requested a formal exchange program with our department. The humans set things on fire in a room full of people, Rulin said. Yes, and for the first time in decades, people are excited about chemistry. Passera moved closer. Her harmonics shifted to something warmer, almost gentle. I have a request, Professor. I would like you to develop a new elective course. Applied Experimental Chemistry, subtitled Human Methods. A course that teaches the principles of hands-on experimentation, learning by doing. Kitchen chemistry, as Mr. Weber calls it. Rulin's skin went pale blue. You want me to teach students to blow things up. I want you to teach students to love what they study. We have spent centuries making science safe, Rulin, and we should be proud of that. But somewhere along the way, we made it sterile. We drained the wonder out of it. We turned chemistry into something that happens behind containment fields and robotic arms, something you observe from a distance and record on a datapad. She paused, her light shifting to deep amber. Humans never did that. They never stopped touching, tasting, mixing, burning. They never stopped putting their hands in it. And maybe that is why a species from a Category 12 death world walked into our academy and reminded us what discovery is supposed to feel like. Rillin sat in the starlight for a long time. Then he stood, nodded once, and left. He found Danny in the student commons, sitting with Scylla and a crowd of students who seemed to have permanently attached themselves to the human. Danny was telling a story about his uncle and a barbecue that had gotten slightly out of hand, which, based on the description, involved a propane tank, a garden hose, and a neighbor's fence. Mr. Weber. Danny looked up. Professor. Hey, I would like to discuss something with you. The dean has asked me to develop a new course. Applied Experimental Chemistry. She suggested that I might benefit from a co-instructor. Danny blinked. Then he smiled, not the wild grin of someone about to ignite thermite, but something quieter and real. Yeah? What's the catch? We start with kitchen chemistry. Your methods, my safety oversight. I will not have students losing eyebrows in my department. Fair enough. But I'm going to need access to a bigger room. I anticipated that. Laboratory 7 has been cleared. Lab 7? That's the big one with the blast-rated walls. Yes, I felt they might be appropriate. Danny laughed. Scylla clapped her small paws together, her ears standing straight up. The following week, Scylla published her journal. Human Chemical Phenomena, a field study in Death World Scientific Methods, appeared in the Union Academic Network on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday evening, it was the most downloaded student paper in a decade. It was cited in 14 research articles within a month. The Funaki Science Council recommended it as required reading for all incoming xenochemistry students. The first session of Applied Experimental Chemistry took place on a bright station morning, the binary stars flooding the corridor windows with warm light. Roland arrived early, as he always did, and found the lecture hall already packed. Every seat was taken. Students sat on the stairs and stood along the walls. There were students from departments that had nothing to do with chemistry, engineering students, biology students, even a group of philosophy students who said they wanted to understand the human relationship with risk. Danny walked in carrying a cardboard box. He sat on the front table and opened it. Inside was a box of baking soda, a bottle of vinegar, and a stack of small plastic cups. He looked out at the room. Every face watched him. Funaki, Mirati, Arivian, beings from a dozen worlds, all waiting. All right, Danny said. Who wants to make a volcano? Every hand went up. Rulin stood beside him, his forearms folded, his skin shifting through gentle shades of silver and blue. He looked at the raised hands. He looked at the faces behind them, curious, eager, alive in a way he had not seen in years. He had spent 42 years teaching students to respect chemistry from a distance. Perhaps it was time they learned to love it up close. Even if it meant the occasional boom. He reached into the box, picked up a plastic cup, and held it out to the nearest student. Carefully, he said. Danny grinned at him. That's the spirit, Professor.